So with Apple's Glow Time event right around the corner and the iPhone 16 lineup release looming, I wanted to talk about the iPhone 15 Pro Max and why it's my absolute favorite iPhone of all time, and there are 3 big reasons as to why. Let's get into them. So before we get started, and to answer a lot of questions in the comments, I know that people are going to be talking about the original iPhone probably being the best iPhone of all time, and then maybe have their own varying opinions, but I'm throwing nostalgia out the window for now, and really focusing on why the iPhone 15 Pro Max for me personally was my favorite iPhone, because there are arguments, even for my sake, to say that maybe the original iPhone, which I did own, or maybe even the iPhone 10 series, because that was the first iPhone that really changed up what the iPhone looked like, could have arguments as to why those are the best iPhones. But to me personally, the 15 Pro Max is my favorite iPhone, and for 3 specific reasons, and stay tuned for the last one because that one is the most important one. So the first reason has to be the overall design, the build material choices, that titanium finish, the weight of it. Basically everything that has to do with the design of the new iPhone makes it my favorite and probably the best looking iPhone. Like I said, there could be an argument maybe for the iPhone 10 to be my favorite or best looking iPhone, but I do give the edge over to the 15 Pro Max because not only did it change the actual build material totally, but it feels more premium, it got a little bit smaller in the hand, it got lighter while keeping the same exact screen size. So that new titanium build of the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max really changed up the weight distribution and the overall weight of the iPhone, especially compared to the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max of last year. But people did like that mirror finish on the rails that made it look almost like a piece of jewelry. But that iPhone, not only was it heavier than the current iPhone 15 Pro Max, but it was also more uncomfortable to hold in the hand, in my personal opinion. And that goes for all the iPhones from the iPhone 12 all the way to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, because they did go with that kind of more industrial design, to kind of change up the design language a little bit, and for the most part, everybody was for that new design change of having those flat sides. But like I mentioned, having it on the iPad is one thing, having it in a handheld device that's constantly kind of digging into your fingers while holding it is something that to me over time got annoying to hold. So when Apple departed from that, while still keeping the industrial design but now rounding off the edges, made it much more comfortable to hold in the hand for long periods of time, and then also adding in the lightweight nature of the titanium finish, but also making it extremely rugged, because titanium is a very strong material, makes this design language, this material choice, and the overall look and feel of this iPhone my favorite one by far. Alongside all those new build materials, you also had the new finishes on the iPhone itself. So you do have that matte finish on the rear of the iPhone. Even though it is glass, it makes it feel kind of like this beautiful, soft touch, not rubber per se, but kind of metally. But even though it is still glass, like I mentioned, the side rails are this brushed titanium, so it doesn't get all fingerprinty like the stainless steel one did with the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max. And then of course you have the dynamic island. Now the dynamic island isn't new to the 15 Pro Max. It did come over from the 14 and the 14 Pro Max, but I just love how everything just got a little bit tighter, a little bit neater. The actual dynamic island had a lot more use cases from a software perspective, and then matching that up with the thinness of the bezels, which were much thinner than the 14 Pro and Pro Max, makes the iPhone feel so futuristic and look that way as well. So again, from a design standpoint, if you do want to argue for the iPhone 10, I definitely see that argument because it was very revolutionary at the time, but the 15 Pro Max is kind of like the ultimate, maybe tightened up and ultimate look of what Apple wanted the iPhone 10 to be maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. So design is the first reason why the iPhone 15 Pro Max is my favorite iPhone. Next up, let's talk cameras, because the camera sensors on these iPhones have gotten better and better over time, but there's a couple things about the iPhone camera array that I really do like. So of course, you do have the best-in-class video performance, and that's what I use on a day-to-day basis. As you can see, I am using my iPhone 15 Pro Max currently to record this A-roll, and it looks great, especially if you have great lighting to begin with. But the biggest thing that I like that they introduced with the 15 Pro Max is going to be that 5x telephoto lens. I'm using that 5x telephoto much more in my day-to-day personal life than I ever thought I would. Being able to zoom in and have an actual optical zoom at 5x and still have it clear as day is an amazing thing to have, and it's not until you really experience it that you really start to notice like, wow, I can actually use this more and more often, because previously when we had the regular zoom, digital zoom, I would never ever zoom in. Maybe I would zoom in a tiny bit, but to zoom in 5x I would never do because it would get pixelated, it would get noisy, and it just wasn't worth it for me to digitally zoom. I might as well take a normal photo and crop it after the fact. But now including a new 5x telephoto lens in the Pro Max, unfortunately the 15 Pro did not get the 5x telephoto, but still, having a 12 megapixel 5x telephoto on the Pro Max was a game changer, like I said, in my personal day-to-day life. I don't really use it professionally, but I love taking pictures of maybe my daughter a little farther away on a slide, or if we are moving around and I want to zoom in on something that's a little bit farther away to get a much clearer picture of it. That 5x telephoto lens has been used much more than I thought I originally would use it. And then of course you have the actual regular sensors. You have the wide sensor at 48 megapixels that can then be cropped in at 2x optical technically, because it is cropping into the inside 12 megapixels. And the way the software works with this new hardware and these new camera sensors has been great, being able to zoom into like 1.2, 1.4, and 1.5x to mimic different lens variations while still keeping it not really digitally zoomed, but still optically zoomed, because it's just cropping into the actual megapixels, and that's why Apple kept it at 48. Now there are rumors with the new sensors to be coming that have 48 and 48 on both the ultra wide and the telephoto to kind of match up from a megapixel standpoint, so that will be great. But for now, this camera array and this camera setup has worked wonders for me, and it's giving me a huge return on my investment, because like I said, I use these cameras to essentially make me money at the end of the day, and they are great cameras. And I always tell people, if you are trying to get into this creator space, if you are trying to create movies or create YouTube videos or just create in general using video, use what you have around you. Don't go out and buy an expensive camera unless you absolutely need to, and try to get to that top 5 and 1%, because for most people, especially if you're just starting out, the camera in your pocket, which is usually an iPhone, is going to be your absolute best camera. And now finally, drum roll please for the final reason, and you guys might have guessed this in the comments below, but it has to be that USB-C port. The USB-C port on the iPhone, I knew that I wanted it, and I knew that it would make my life a little bit easier, but I didn't know how quickly and how much of a change it was gonna make into my workflow as somebody who uses their iPhone as their main camera. My main thought was that, hey, now I only need to bring one cable with me whenever I do go on trips or anything like that, because I can use the same USB-C cable to charge my iPhone, I can use it to charge my iPad, my MacBook Air, and any other auxiliary devices. So that alone was a nice little kind of check off that made me think USB-C will be nice to have. But again, Apple didn't increase charging speeds, it didn't make it faster to charge via USB-C. It still maxed out at those 27 watts, which was fast enough for iPhones for the most part. But the biggest change, especially on the Pro series of iPhones, is going to be those data transfer speeds and being able to use external SSDs in your workflow. For instance, I'm somebody that's been using my iPhone as a main camera for years, dating back to probably the iPhone 6 and 6S, and what I would do is I would rely on things like AirDrop to move those files from my iPhone to whatever I'm editing on. Right now it's my iPad, but even back in the day it was my MacBook Air, and from time to time it was reliable, and as long as I had a good Wi-Fi connection and everything was connecting and working, it would transfer those files pretty seamlessly. But as time went on, those files got bigger and AirDrop got a little less reliable, and I don't really know why. Sometimes I would have to restart a transfer, the files would take too long to transfer over, so I was kind of stuck at the mercy of AirDrop because I wasn't offloading via lightning cable, and that would also take a long time. But the inclusion of the USB-C port and the Pro models having USB 3 transfer speeds is an absolute game changer. I go one of two ways when recording on the iPhone. First, it's just using the normal camera settings directly from the iPhone, so I'm recording in 4K 30 or 4K 60. Those files do get saved locally on the iPhone, but then I plug in my SSD, transfer them out. Within seconds, I can move 10 to 20 gigabytes worth of footage and then be able to use that same SSD to then plug to my iPad and work off of that SSD to edit in LumaFusion. So that alone has saved me hours and hours of workflow and efficiency time because that USB-C port is that amazing. But then if you are somebody that uses something like ProRes footage, which is these huge raw file sizes, which I tend to avoid because I don't really use them too often, but there are a lot of people that love using ProRes, and those files are gigantic. We're talking about 6 gigs for a 1-minute file. So if you do have an iPhone with only 256 storage, that's gonna add up very quickly. Now being able to plug in an external SSD, like the one that I have here, or the one that has a MagSafe connector on the rear, which I'll link down below, being able to then directly record that ProRes footage to that SSD because I have a USB-C port is, again, a complete game changer for anybody that uses their iPhone in a workflow setting. And even if you're somebody that takes pictures, let's say on your camera, or takes pictures elsewhere, or just wants to transfer them out to an SSD, or just wants to use USB-C dongles, everything is much more readily available, it's cheaper, it's easy to use, you don't have to rely on lightning dongles anymore. So being able to use your iPhone in a USB-C setting to have, and then have access to the abundance of USB-C dongles and USB-C hubs that are out there, and everything works correctly, that's exactly what Apple has from an iPhone standpoint on the USB-C port side. But for now, just as simple as having one cable to charge everything and being able to transfer out video files pretty much 100 times faster than we used to before really helps out on the workflow, and that is by far my favorite new feature and what makes the iPhone 15 Pro Max my favorite iPhone of all time, everybody. Now, I do want to know from the audience if these use cases from the USB-C standpoint is something that a lot of people use. Am I kind of in the 1 or 5% of people that use your iPhone this way, or are there a lot of people that are currently transferring out a lot of files via the iPhone USB-C port because there is a USB-C port now available? Or is it the other way around, that for most people this was actually a burden because they had all these lightning cables laying around that now they couldn't use? Let me know in the comment down below which side you're on, if it's a positive, a negative, or if you're kind of just in between and don't really care at that point. But those are the 3 main things that make the iPhone 15 Pro Max my favorite iPhone of all time. I had the 14 Pro Max, and I could not say that for the 14 Pro Max. Yes, it looked kind of nice and it looked cool with the stainless steel sides, but at the end of the day, it still wasn't better than at that point, my favorite one was the iPhone 10, because that one really revolutionized and really made way for the iPhone series and what we see today. But the iPhone 15 Pro Max was my favorite. I'm gonna have it for a very long time. I do plan on getting the new iPhone 16 Pro Max to see what the differences are, so definitely stay subscribed. But leave a comment down below. What is your favorite iPhone of all time? Is it one that I mentioned here? Is it maybe the most popular one, which I believe was the iPhone 6? They sold the most amount of iPhones with that iPhone 6 lineup, and it's not even close. So let me know in the comment down below, everybody. If you made it to the end, leave a little dolphin so I know you made it to the end. And if you guys want to watch more videos like this one, click on one of these videos right here. I, for one, am excited for glow time to see exactly what Apple gives us. Let me know if you are as well. Peace, everybody.